Welcome back again to Last Week I Watched. I'm Mark and I watch and review movies and TV and provide suggestions on things that might interest you. So this week we're going with the classic movie theme, and I've watched a number of classic movies, and here are my suggestions. So this week I'd like to talk about Cruising, Taxi Driver, Scarface, The Exorcist, Logan's Run, and Soylent Green. So let's talk about them. Okay, so first up is Cruising. It's a film from 1980. It stars Al Pacino, Paul Sorvino, Karen Allen. It's showing on Netflix. So this is about police detective Steve Burns, played by Al Pacino. He goes undercover in the underground S&M gay underground subculture of New York to catch a serial killer who is preying on gay men. So the film's, it's really gritty and grimy. The leather culture looks to have been forced down back alleys and underground bars, and the whole thing just has an overall air of seediness. When bodies of gay men start turning up around New York, in pieces no less, Stephen Burns is assigned the task of going deep undercover by his boss, played by Paul Sorvino, in the leather community to see if he can find the killer. He has a girlfriend, Nancy, played by Karen Allen, but he doesn't seem that fazed about entering the gay community, reasoning that it'll just fast track him to promotion. So he sets himself up in the community, and a lot of the film is him moving through the underground clubs at night, a lot of which is portrayed as a horny meat market of carnal lust and sexual acts, as he's trying to get to know people and build up trust so he can gather information. I don't know whether Steve ends up engaging in sexual acts with any of the men, but I'd certainly imagine that would be an issue. Initially, he seems to be returning home occasionally to have increasingly aggressive sex with his girlfriend, as if he's trying to reassert his heterosexuality by furiously pounding her into the mattress for some reason. But eventually he starts having issues with even this, and his girlfriend asks why he's no longer interested in her, and they break up. He seems to get some interest from his gay neighbour Ted, and there's perhaps some implication that something may have gone on there. After asking his boss to check out a suspect, the police pull in his suspect and interrogate him aggressively, and the cops beat up the suspect and are pretty judgmental about his whole gay lifestyle. The film doesn't portray anyone in the film in a good light. The gay men are sexually aggressive and depraved, and the cops are immoral and uncaring. Earlier in the film, two cops from the 6th precinct, they detain a couple of gay men. At least I think they were gay men. They may have been trans. They looked a bit like male women. I'm not quite sure whether or not the film makes that distinction, but they detain them for sexual favours, and when it's reported, the cops don't act on it. It's just dismissed. Spoilers, if you want to watch the movie, hit pause and go and watch it. Eventually Steve encounters the killer, Stuart, and stabs him before he can kill Steve. Now, Steve gets immunity from his undercover work because he's a cop, so therefore he's the good guy, but when Ted, his neighbour, turns up dead, the film ambiguously suggests that it could have been Ted's jealous lover, Gregory, or maybe it might have been Steve, who, in parallels to the killer Stuart, is lashing out at gay men as a means of rejecting his sexuality. Stuart seems to have had a really troubled childhood, and particularly issues with his father, which he was acting out on his victims. I wondered if Steve was attempting to return to his heterosexual normality, but was troubled by what he had to do undercover and was cleaning it up. The film troublingly ends with Nancy wearing Steve's leather outfit and Steve staring into the mirror hauntingly. I'm not sure what kind of long-term issues Steve is going to be having, or whether his dalliances in the gay world have opened up something that was already inside. It's an interesting movie, and I'm not surprised that it had quite a lot of backlash at the time, both from the straight community and the gay community. And I can see why. As mentioned, it's not very flattering to either group, but I guess it's reflective of the world at the time and the prejudices and views that were in place. There's not a lot of story in the film. It becomes almost quasi-documentary at times, with the club footage occupying a lot of its runtime. It sometimes felt like it had some pacing issues, not enough things happen over its runtime, and the sequences of Steve cruising the clubs, they start to get a bit repetitive after a while. Surprisingly, quite a lot of that footage was cut though, as the film originally got an X rating for sexual content and had to be cut extensively to get the R18 rating. But Pacino does a great job with what he has to work with. A lot of times his haunting expression says more than the dialogue. Check it out as an interesting artifact of a past time and some early work from a great actor. Okay, next up is Taxi Driver. It's from 1976. It's starring Robert De Niro, Jodie Foster, Sybil Shepherd, and it's on Netflix. So this is about Travis Bickle, I think, played by Robert De Niro. Travis is a mentally unstable Vietnam War veteran who works as a nighttime taxi driver in New York City. As he suffers from insomnia, he spends his time driving at night, watching porn movies in seedy theatres during the day, and thinking about how the world has degenerated into a cesspool. He's isolated, he's having trouble connecting with other people, and he develops an obsession with Betsy, played by Sybil Shepherd. But after an incident with her, he believes he has to do whatever needs to be done to make the world a better place, because he's the man. He procures some weapons and starts to plan to kill a senator, and when that fails, decides to liberate Iris, played by Jodie Foster, from her pimp. The film's an interesting character study on a disturbed individual as he self-destructs. He's disaffected, he's alienated from society, he's probably suffering from PTSD, and with the insomnia, it's bound to affect his thought processes. He's trying unsuccessfully to connect with people around him and becoming more isolated. He's so disconnected he fails to understand why Betsy doesn't appreciate being taken to a porn film in a seedy theatre for a date, and then his attempts to get back with her become increasingly more threatening. He's desperately in need of help, but in today's self-absorbed society, people just don't seem to notice. I was honestly expecting him to implode spectacularly by the end, with him targeting the senator, but after that goes wrong, he goes after liberating Iris from her pimp. I guess he had a list of things he was working down. He takes the time to write a letter to his parents, which, even though it's filled with lies, seems to be him saying goodbye. Now, I want to talk about the ending a little bit, so spoilers here. If you want to pause and go and watch it and come back, feel free. So when he has a shootout with the pimp and the henchman and he's wounded, the film ends with him being vindicated as the hero. And I wondered if this really happened or not. Is the world so fickle that they see a disturbed man do something they perceive as okay and praise him? Or did he in fact die and was playing his victory in his mind as he faded out? Here he's accepted, he's praised by everyone, and that could seem to be an attainment of what he was looking for. I think it's likely he died at the end. He went out in his mind trying to fix the world, but in reality he's really changed nothing. He's just contributed, ironically, to the crime, at least from the police officer's point of view. Travis driving away with Betsy is him going to the afterlife with what he perceives as his angel, but he doesn't look at peace, so I'm guessing he's confined himself to hell ultimately. Perhaps his hell is driving New York forever with all the filth for eternity. Overall, it's a good movie. It's quite gritty like Cruising, and again, I think it's a time capsule of that period. The actors do a great job. This is a defining film for De Niro, and Jodie Foster does especially well considering she's only 12 and she's playing a hooker. It's an interesting character piece on someone with mental illness. The ending wasn't quite as excessive as I was maybe expecting it to go, so it's a lot more character driven rather than action. I hope Travis achieved some redemption with Iris and that she went on to something better, but sadly I don't think Travis had a happy ending in reality. Check it out. Okay, next up is Scarface. It's a film from 1983. It stars Al Pacino, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Stephen Bauer. It's showing on Netflix. So this one's set in 1980 Miami. A determined Cuban immigrant, Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino, finds himself working for a drug dealer, Frank Lopez, played by Robert Loggia, and impresses when a drug deal goes bad with the Colombians. He manages to sort it out. But Tony is hot-headed and he brings a whole new level of violence to Miami. As he rises in the business, Tony's impatience and ambition cause him to take action against Frank, ultimately taking over his business and his mistress Elvira, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. Tony's arrogance and ambition quickly makes him a target and everything comes crumbling down around him. I hadn't realised it, but this is actually a remake of a 1932 Italian gangster film of the same name. I guess the Scarface title makes more sense in that context. The film initially received a negative reception when it was released due to its excessive violence, profanity and graphic drug use. It also didn't depict Cuban expatriates in a positive light. Given time though, it has been reappraised and it's now considered one of the greatest gangster films of all time and as regarded as a cult classic. It's got a really great cast, and Pacino particularly dominates the film as Tony. Despite being warned not to use his own product, Tony's cocaine use in the film contributes to his ambition and aggression. In reality, the cast was snorting powdered baby laxative though, so I'm sure that must have been fun. The film was also shot mostly around Los Angeles as the Miami Tourist Board declined the filming request there. The film was initially given an X rating and De Palma had to cut the film 3 times to get just to that. He refused to cut it anymore, and it took an appeal board to get the rating overturned and changed to an R so they could show the film. Sure, it's violent, but it's got a really good story, especially when Tony, having achieved everything he wants, questions, is this all there is? What's the point of limitless ambition if you can't enjoy any of it? And I often wonder if people that have ruthlessly climbed over everyone to get to the top find it isolating when they get there. I recommend checking it out. It's a great gangster story, and it's, I think, a critique of the excess of wealth and power. And in the end, getting everything he wanted cost them everything he loved, ultimately. Okay, next up is The Exorcist. It's from 1973. It stars Ellen Burstyn, Max von Sydow and Linda Blair. It's showing on Netflix. So this is about 12-year-old Regan, played by Linda Blair. She's possessed by a mysterious entity. Her mother, Chris, played by Ellen Burstyn, seeks the help of Father Merrin, played by Max von Sydow, and Father Karras to help her. This is based on the 1971 book by William Peter Blatty. The Exorcist is one of the gold standard scary movies from the 1970s. It's still terrifying today. The novel was inspired by a case of demonic possession from 1949 and the subsequent exorcism. Whether or not you believe it, that's an entirely different issue, but the film is pretty scary. It had a very difficult production, with Warner Brothers opposing the main casting choices as they were unknowns at the time. A fire that destroyed the majority of the set, and Blair and Burstyn suffered long-term injuries and on-set accidents, which frankly is no surprise given how they are thrown around the sets and on that bed. Production took twice as long as scheduled and cost more than twice the initial budget. However, audiences flocked to it, and despite it causing a lot of controversy, with some viewers suffering adverse physical reactions, vomiting and such, several critics attempting to ban the film, it went on to become the first horror film nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. It went on to win for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound. So it opens at a dig site in northern Iraq, with Catholic priest Lancaster Merrin, played by Max von Sydow, is participating in an archaeological dig which unearths a St. Joseph medallion and an artifact representing Pazuzu, an ancient demon. He doesn't actually get a name till the second film, but we'll talk about that film in another video. As Merrin prepares to leave, he encounters a larger statue of Pazuzu and observes 2 dogs fighting in the desert, which is a bit of foreshadowing there. Meanwhile, in Georgetown, Chris McNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn, is working on a film directed by a friend, Burke. Chris lives with her daughter Regan, played by Linda Blair. Priest Damien Karras confides in a colleague that he's having a crisis of faith and he feels unfit to counsel other priests. And Regan tells her mother about an imaginary friend which he's been talking to through a Ouija board. So that probably contributes to all the backlash against Ouija boards that went on all through the 70s and 80s. In a local church, the statue of Mary is found desecrated, and later when Chris holds a party at her house and Regan appears, she's talking in a strange voice and she urinates all over the carpet. Chris puts Regan to bed and the bed begins shaking violently with them both on it. Later, Burke is found dead at the bottom of the stairs. Now, I do wonder why Burke was killed. Did he try to interfere with Regan? It's a question that's never answered. It just kind of dangled out there. I actually had a look online because I didn't understand why Burke just died, and apparently from the novel, Regan didn't like Burke because she blamed him for her parents splitting up, so maybe the demon latched onto that and tossed him out the window. Honestly, it would have made a bit more sense, I think, if they'd explained it and showed it instead of happening off camera. I don't know whether it's a scene that was maybe cut. Regan goes on to become violent, however. She's subjected to medical tests, but nobody can find what's wrong with her. And honestly, I have to say I'm so glad they've invented MRIs, because that spinal tap procedure looks painful. I could see why people were freaking out in the theatres. The tests find nothing conclusive, and they suggest putting her in an institution, which is the code name back then for a loony bin, and a doctor suggests exorcism, which may have some psychological value. As Regan's condition worsens, she's confined to a room, and Chris in desperation seeks out Father Karras. He doesn't believe, but after witnessing Regan's violent and hostile behaviour for himself, speaks with a superior who refers him to Father Merrin. And together they embark on the ritual of exorcism, and the two priests fight the demon to free Regan. The film holds up really well after all this time. It's a slow burn, as most of those sort of classic horrors are, but it takes time to establish the characters before bringing them into collision. And enough sort of strange and unsettling things happen over the time as well to sort of gradually build on that tension. The effects look really good for the 70s as well. A lot of them were practical effects, and the cast do a great job, especially Blair, who was only 14 at the time. I think the sound also plays a large part in making it scary, with disquieting noises throughout. It's worth checking out if you've never seen it. Maybe leave the lights on when you watch it. Okay, the next film I want to talk about is Logan's Run. It's from 1976. It stars Michael York, Jenny Agutter and Richard Jordan, and it's showing on Netflix. So this is about Logan 5, played by Michael York. He's a Sandman, which is basically a police officer and that's guarding the remnants of human civilization that live in a sealed city beneath a cluster of domes. The city is a utopia run by a computer that takes care of all aspects of life, including reproduction. The citizens live a hedonistic lifestyle, anything they want goes, but to prevent overpopulation, everyone must undergo the rite of carousel when they reach the age of 30. They're killed under the guise of being renewed. To track this, each citizen is implanted with a life clock crystal in their palm that changes colour as they age. Now, most residents just accept rebirth, but some attempt to flee, and they're known as runners. The Sandmen are then assigned to pursue and terminate runners as they try to escape. So Logan 5 and Francis 7, played by Richard Jordan, they terminate a runner, and Logan finds an ankh among his possessions. Later he meets Jenny 6, played by Jenny Agutter, who also wears an ankh. Logan takes the ankh to the computer, which tells him it's a symbol for a group that helps runners escape and find sanctuary, and the computer does not like this. Logan is assigned to find sanctuary, and the computer changes his life clock to expiring to force him to have to run. Logan meets up with Jessica, and she takes him to the underground and helps him to escape the city. As they're escaping, they're pursued by Francis, and they meet Box, which is a robot designed to capture food for the city from the outside. Logan discovers, though, that Box has been not doing the right thing, shall we say. He's been capturing and freezing runners for food, and nobody subsequently has been getting out. Escaping Box, they flee outside the dome, and seeing the sun for the first time, they go on to discover the remains of human civilization. In the ruins, they find an elderly man. He's been living with many cats, and they're really shocked because they've never seen a person so old. He tells them what happened to humanity, and Logan realizes that sanctuary is a myth. But they can live outside now, so he decides to return to the city to free the people and show them that they can live outside, they can grow old, that they can enjoy the fullness of their lifespan, and that carousel is no longer necessary. Logan's Run is loosely based on a book by William F. Nolan, and they share elements, but the book is quite different. Also in the book, everyone is renewed at 21 and not 30. The book actually has an actual sanctuary, which is a space colony near Mars, but it shares similar themes of population control and controlling computer, etc. The film explores utopian and dystopian themes with the idea that the characters are willing to sacrifice themselves to attain whatever they want for a brief time. Utopias often require participants to give up something to create harmony, but the dystopian elements are the central controlling computer that controls all aspects of life, the dangers of hedonism, and state-sponsored euthanasia. I think there's some really interesting ideas here about whether you'd be willing to give up your freedom willingly if you got everything you wanted, even if it was just for a very short time. Worryingly is whether or not anyone made the choice freely, though, since they're likely not educated into the workings of the city. I also wonder if life would be hollow and pointless if it was just non-stop pleasure without any kind of struggle. The cast is pretty good in this. It has some impressive effects for the time. Although it was reviewed poorly, it did go on to win an Academy Award for visual effects. And I remember seeing this at school, projected on the hall wall, so it's got a soft spot in my heart. It's worth revisiting it and understanding some of the deeper meanings with an adult's perspective. I recommend checking it out. Okay, finally today I want to talk about Soylent Green. It's a film from 1973 starring Charlton Heston, Edward G. Robinson and Lee Taylor Young. It's showing on Netflix. In 2022, Earth is overpopulated and totally polluted. The natural resources have been exhausted and the nourishment of the population is provided by Soylent Industries, a company that makes a food consisting of plankton from the oceans. In New York City, when Soylent's member of the board, William R. Simonson, is murdered apparently by a burglar at the Chelsea Towers West, where he lives, efficient Detective Thorne, played by Charlton Heston, is assigned to investigate the case with his partner, Solomon Sol Roth, played by Edward G. Robinson. Thorne comes to the fancy apartment and meets Simonson's bodyguard Tab Fielding and the furniture, woman that is rented together with the flat, Shirl, played by Lee Taylor Young. And the detective concludes that the executive was not victim of burglary but executed. Further, he finds that Governor Santini and other powerful men want to disrupt and end Thorne's investigation. But Thorne continues his work and discovers a bizarre and disturbing secret of the ingredient used to manufacture Soylent Green. Now, if you've lived under a rock and never heard this, I don't want to spoil it, so hit pause and go watch the film. Okay, so spoilers. Soylent Green is people. The population is now cannibalizing itself, while those at the very top get the good stuff, actual meat, fruit and vegetables, and everyone gets reprocessed citizen. This film is so ahead of its time, or perhaps the problems we're having now have just been around and ignored for so long that it's just become more relevant than ever now. As we're facing into the abyss of catastrophic weather events, possible starvation as our ability to grow food is impacted, species going extinct, and our environment is being horribly polluted, it's just so a few rich fat cats can grow a bit richer for a bit longer, the dystopian future portrayed in this film seems more likely. And this film was based loosely on a novel called Make Room by Harry Harrison, dealing with overpopulation and fighting over lack of resources. But the movie takes it a step further by portraying extreme capitalism as having gone so far that it's now portraying on the consumers, turning them into the consumed. At the point in the film, they're only consuming the dead, but it wouldn't be a stretch to ultimately see them start farming people for those on the top. Someone pointed out online that they thought it would be absurd that people wouldn't notice, but in this age of misinformation that we're living in currently, would people really, if they've had decades of misinformation and lack of information, lack of education, be able to tell or know? Even now it's a struggle to sift through the lies to figure out where the truth is, and I'm highly educated. It's also pretty sad how dehumanized people in this world have become. They're given epithets that reduce them from being people to just being an object, like a book for the cops researcher or furniture. Everything is about transforming them into something less, something disposable and ready for consumption. It's got a really good cast, and shots of Thorne climbing over people to just get down the stairs really hammer home how bad the overcrowding is. Even though he's living in a dump, he's lucky to have that even compared to people that are just living in a stairwell. Compared to the rich people's apartments with their modern conveniences, open space and niceties like running water and live-in furniture, which is basically prostitutes if we're blunt about it, it really shows how unequal society has become. Even the fact that everything is run down and grimy and broken, it just shows a society that's stagnating and in decay. It's no longer moving forward, it's not innovating, it's just backsliding, and ultimately I think it's not going to end well. I don't know if Thorne revealing the truth to everyone will make a difference, because what other choice have they got really? Everything's just ruined. So I recommend checking the film out. It's got some really interesting thoughts. They're extremely relevant today, and we really do need to wake up to our situation and make some changes, or else we could be in the same situation or much worse. Okay, so those are my suggestions for this week. They're all excellent films. Please do check some of them out if you haven't seen them before. They're definitely worth your time. As always, if you enjoyed my reviews, please click on the like and subscribe button. Feel free to leave any comments below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and if you've got anything else that you can recommend. I'd certainly be interested in checking out some more classic films, even if they're just a rewatch through more critical eyes. Also on screen is my Twitter account. If you want to follow me and tweet at me, I often tweet while I'm watching things, so we can talk about movies if you're also watching the same movie. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed it. As always, stay well out there, stay safe, enjoy some movies and TV, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye now.